We're recording here. Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, just wanted to chat with you about your big night on the 29th and some kind of Humphreys and DT history and things like that.
Awesome.
And, this is going to be going on our socials for the new Humphreys radio show that we have going on the internet. Um,
Killer.
so I guess we'll just go ahead and get going. I'll do an intro and then we'll get started.
Right on, man.
Cool. All right, everybody. This is Kevin Cassels, the host of Pure Saturation, featuring the music of Humphreys McGee on JEMP Radio, Saturday nights at 10 p.m. Once a month as part of a new block of music called Adolescent Subtle Sounds, featuring all sorts of different original programming on JEMP Radio. And this exclusive for the JEMP Radio and Pure Saturation socials is a really exciting event for us. We have Mike Portnoy, Hall of Fame drummer, modern drummer of the year for what, like 100 years, it seems like, at least at least 25 or 30 is it feels like, anyway, something like that. But he's one of the greatest drummers of all time, and also um, joined Humphreys McGee on stage on December 29th for a memorable set, and we want to talk to Mike about that, his fandom. He's been an Humphreys McGee fan for quite a while. I like a lot longer than many of you may think. So right off the bat, Mike, I gotta say, just the feedback from you on your socials, the feedback from the band, the crowd, it seems like it was an amazing night for you on the 29th, sitting in with Humphreys. I'm sure you had expectations that it would be fun and it would be a great time, but it seems to me like it exceeded everyone's expectations. Tell us about how you felt about it.
It was well, first of all, thanks for having me. Nice
Sure,
to be here.
absolutely.
But yeah, it was an awesome experience. What a cool thing to have done and experienced. And everybody was so welcoming, the band, the crew, the fans, everybody just really made me feel right at home and totally welcome and part of the family. And I mean, it's definitely a family vibe. I definitely can feel that energy, at the show and even at rehearsals and sound check and things like that. So yeah, it was a amazing experience. I believe it or not, I learned a few things from them that in all my 30 plus years of touring and playing live and doing these kind of things, they definitely inspired me with a few new tricks, that were really, really cool to have experienced and been part of. And yeah, it was just great all around. Really could not have been happier and more excited by it.
Well, this has been in the making for a long time. I went with Ryan Stasek and Jake Sinegar to see you guys open for Iron Maiden right before the end of your first tenure with the band. And for those of you who don't know, Dream Theater, Mike Portnoy co-founded Dream Theater in 1985. He left in 2010 to do some other things and has just rejoined literally about a month or so ago. And so the band has been the guys in Humphreys have been a fan of yours for a long time. And I don't know if you know this, but at one point Ryan actually tried to get the band to do the Dance of Eternity.
Oh,
And
really? Really?
yeah, and possibly the most complex Dream Theater song of all time. So that's been just collaborating in some way has kind of been on the radar for a while. And I went to go see Ryan, and we went to go see one of our favorite bands, Fishbone, in Charleston last month. And he didn't even say hello to me. The first thing he says was, "I think we got Portnoy for New Year's Eve." And then the first thing was, "Well, he's got to play Wizard Burial Ground."
Right.
And he said, "Well, he's really busy. It looks like it's just going to be a set of covers." And we were like, "Okay, well, we still got to see if we can get him to play Wizard Burial Ground." And then we got on the internet, and I was going to start trying to spread the word. And the word was as soon as that announcement
Exactly.
was made, it was Wizard Burial Ground mania going on. And you caught on to that, obviously. Had you heard the song before? Were you familiar with it? And when did you decide, like, okay, sticking to covers may not be the best thing here with all the groundswell to hear this song?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, like Ryan said, the original plan was to just do a cover set. And to give a little backstory to that. When they asked me to do this gig, of course I was up for it and totally excited to do it. But I'm usually juggling, 3 to 5 different bands and projects of my own and having to remember hours and hours and hours of music. And I was thinking, do I really want to add another thing on my plate? And usually when I'm learning all this music for my own bands, it's one thing because it's my own music, my own stuff that I've played a million times. But to come in and learn a whole set of somebody else's music would have been, a real chore. And I don't want to say chore, but a real challenge, would have been a real commitment. And at first I was like, oh, man, I don't know if I could do that. So I wonder if they would be up for a cover set because I know they do a lot of covers
Yeah.
and one-off stuff. So that was my initial suggestion. But then as soon as they announced it, yeah, like you said, the social medias, every comment on Instagram, on Facebook, everywhere I looked, it was Wizard Burial Ground, Wizard Burial Ground. You got to do it. So I was like, oh shit, man. Well, you got to, got to give the people what they want. And I was like, I want to come in here and make this as cool as it could possibly be. So I hadn't heard of that song. And answer your question, I wasn't familiar with it yet.
Yeah, it's not
But
on an
as
album, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I started searching on YouTube and pulled up a whole bunch of them from YouTube, and I was like, oh man, this is going to be a challenge, but you know what? I got to commit to it. So I told those guys, all right, I'll take the plunge, no pun intended, and let's do this. And then once I committed to that, they threw a few more my way. I was like, all right, you know what? Let's do this. And we decided to make the show maybe half covers and then half of their own tunes. And they ended up giving me four of their tunes to learn. But Wizard was surely the biggest one for me to tackle, and the one that I spent the most time really learning and getting familiar with because there's so much there, and it's such an awesome piece of music. It's so, and I could see why the fans would have been asking that for me because it's
Right.
definitely totally up my alley. The whole prog metal, vibe to it. It was perfectly suited to my style. So I'm glad that I caved in and decided to take the challenge, and it ended up being one of the highlights of the night for sure.
Yeah, that is pure Jake Sininger, and for every song like that, he has 100 that we have not heard.
Really?
He has a
Wow.
vault of just, and a few of them have come out. If you want to look up the song Nether and also Dark Brush, both came out in 2018. Just pure sludge metal mania.
Wow. I'll
And
definitely look
so
those up.
as soon as your name came into the conversation, it was like, yeah. And then of course you knew Plunger, because you'd been familiar with Anchor Drops for years.
Yeah,
Um,
I had that song was on my house music playlist back when it came out. You would know the year better than me, but it's
2004.
probably 2004. Okay. So yeah, it was probably the Octavarium tour where I had that on the house music on for the Dream Theater tour. So I was hearing it every night, playing in the house while I was in the dressing room. But yeah, I I became aware of the band in the early 2000s and immediately fell in love with them and what they do. But yeah, that was one of the only ones that I really remembered distinctly. And then they gave me a few others, Conduit and Puppet String. Actually, they gave me a list of about 6 to 8 songs to check out and see which would be the best fit. And these were the ones that we ended up pulling.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about learning a thing or two. Just sticking one for another second with Wizard Burial Ground. The guys were saying that the very ending of
Mm.
Wizard Burial Ground, there were some timing issues. It is a little, it's repetitive, but the timing can be off a little bit. And Ryan, I was talking to Ryan again about it, and he said just it's one of the highlights of my career. Mike he didn't get it at first, and he was asking me questions about it, and he's like, I can't believe Mike Portnoy is sitting here asking me about the timing on one of our songs.
Yeah, that the ending to that song to me was the most challenging part of the entire song, not only the whole song, but the whole set that I was doing. That ending I found really challenging. It's got a really cool kind of Tool vibe to it.
Right.
And it's in groupings of 5, 7, and 8. And the way that it's phrased, the way that one of the difficult things for me to learn a drum part was that like pulling up these live versions, Chris would play the drum parts to these songs different every time.
Yeah.
So I would have like maybe 3 or 4 different versions of any of these songs, and it's like, well, which version am I going to learn the drums to? Because one version he's playing all upbeats, the next version he's playing halftime. Like which
Yeah.
one do I cling on to learn? And in the end, it actually made me realize that being it is kind of open, that it gave me a little room to be able to do my thing. So when it came to the end of Wizard, that whole 5, 7, and 8 bit. I ended up not even learning any of the versions that Chris did, and I ended up just kind of creating my own thing, which was just to be as simple as possible, just to lay it down. I told the guys, look, I'd rather just be the anchor playing the time signatures than try to come up with this crazy part and fuck it up, because it's
Right.
already so complicated and so coordinated. The polyrhythms and the kind of counterpart that's going on between all the parts there. I didn't want to make it any more confusing. If anything, I wanted to
Right.
kind of anchor it down. So, but yeah, Ryan was kind of like he was kind of like almost conducting me with his body, giving me the downbeats for that end section. And it ended up we ended up getting it. I ended up getting it, and but that was the section I feared the most. Playing all the fast and heavy passages earlier in the song, that's totally my wheelhouse. So that was kind of easier to play for me than the end, which was a little more counterpoint.
Yeah, yeah, and then we had Conduit, which Jason Bonham's actually played on that a few times, and then we had Puppet String, which I think could be a huge hit if this had come out in the '90s. Of course, you know better than anybody, the way radio is today. If that would have come out around the time of Pull Me Under or
Yeah.
something like that,
No,
that
that
would have been
the
huge.
chorus on that song is so strong. That riff, that main riff that
Yeah,
comes in towards the middle and then it comes back in again at the end. Yeah, that's I mean that's I have this horrible habit of constantly comparing riffs and music to other things. It's just the part of my
me
musical
too.
jukebox in my head, but
Yeah.
it reminds me of like a bit of like a Pearl Jam kind of riff, and it's so catchy and it's got such a great vibe to it. And you could just feel the audience energy during that riff and the whole song. It's great. I ended up really getting to know these songs really well while doing my homework because like I said, I would look up all different versions on YouTube, and for each one of these songs, I was able to pick and choose between, multiple versions, whether it be in the studio or live, or some of them have these extended jams in the middle, or some are more condensed. So, in doing all my homework, it gave me a lot of ear candy to cling on to, and kind of pick and choose which versions I wanted to pull from when learning them.
It's kind of tough when no two versions are the same.
Right, exactly.
I mean, there's some that kind of follow a certain framework, but like you said, a lot of times they'll just open it up completely.
Well,
And
that's what I learned from them. Like literally all four. So, well, actually, no, less, I would say less Wizard. Wizard was kind of set in stone, but Puppet String, Conduit, and Plunger, each one of those ones, they just had an open jazz odyssey, as they call it, like in the center of each one of them,
right.
which was, I guess for most people, it would probably scare the shit out of a lot of people. Like if you're not familiar with jam band stuff or improvising and stuff like that, like how do you do a gig with a band that you've never played with, and then you're expected to just create on the spot in front of an audience? But personally, I love that. I'm a huge, huge fan of jamming and improvising, and a few of my bands and projects through the years have utilized it. So it actually for me was real exciting to fly in the edge of your seat like that, and just they're like, all right, after the second chorus, let's just go for it, and go out there for 8 to 10 minutes before wrangling it back in. And like I said, I think a lot of people would probably be scared by that, but I was absolutely up for it and excited by it.
Yeah, and that leads me into something I've been wanting to ask you for years. And now that we have a platform, you are a fan of improvisation and some of the bigger jam bands. My two favorite bands are Fish and Iron Maiden, and there aren't many guys like us. And you've mentioned a few times that you're into Fish, and I know you guys were both on Elektra Records, I believe, in
Hmm.
the '90s. There's a picture you put out with you and Trey from years ago,
Right.
and I couldn't help but notice the structure of Dream Theater concerts back in the day. Different set lists every night.
Yep.
Beyond This Life could be 9 minutes one night, and in Tokyo 20 minutes.
Right.
Pure improvisation. You got Bombay Vindaloo. You've got doing all kinds of crazy covers, and Humphreys does, mini Rush covers, and just like you guys did the Necromancer, and these deep cuts, and notably doing full albums, such as Made in Japan and stuff like that. I couldn't help but think, this. It seems like you were structuring it almost based on the way that Fish and the Grateful Dead structure their shows, how much of that was an influence? I mean, especially covering the albums. Fish was really the first to really make that kind of a thing, and now it is, you know.
You're absolutely right, 100%. I modeled a lot of Dream Theater set lists back in the day, back in the 2000s, especially. I would write a completely different set list for every show, for Dream Theater each and every night. We would have this tradition where if we were doing 2 nights in the same venue, the second night we would cover an album in its entirety. And we did Metallica's Master of Puppets, we did Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast, we did Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, Deep Purple's Made in Japan. And it absolutely was something that I modeled after Fish. And Fish was my gateway to Humphreys. I mean, we could talk about that later, but before, I mean, that's how I discovered Humphreys. A lot of people knew that I was really into Fish and them doing these one-off covers and, cool set lists and jams. So that's why I checked out Humphreys to begin with. But to backtrack a little, I guess the late 90s, early 2000s, I started realizing what Fish was doing, and I loved that they would have all these different set lists each night and doing all these cover albums. They did the Beatles' White Album, and they did the Who's Quadrophenia, and Talking Heads. I just thought it was the coolest thing ever, as a fan, as a music lover. So I wanted to integrate that into Dream Theater and kind of make us kind of like, the Fish of prog metal. And it became a big part of what Dream Theater was doing, at least throughout the 2000s, before I left in 2010. But yeah, it was a big model for me. Absolutely. And like I said, that's what led me to Humphreys a few years later. People turning me on to Humphreys doing a similar thing, doing a lot of covers, a lot of jams. I also like that Humphreys had more of a prog and a metal background more than Fish. I was never a Grateful Dead fan, to be honest. Musically, it just wasn't my cup of tea. So Fish was kind of in that wheelhouse, but I loved that they had all these cool covers of classic rock bands and stuff.
And
But
they
Humphreys
practiced.
was doing covers of like Metallica and Rush and King Crimson and stuff. So that appealed to me even more. It was kind of like the Fish mentality, but a little bit more musically in sync with the world that I am a part of.
That's exactly what happened to me. And oddly enough, I discovered you guys after Fish and Humphreys. I knew Pull Me Under. I knew that you guys were technically proficient. I knew nothing else. And when 6 Degrees came out, my wife at the time gave it to me as a Christmas present. And before you
Wow.
know it, we were going to score at Radio City and seeing
Oh,
shows.
wow.
We've
Cool.
seen pretty much every tour since about 2005. And that was the reason, is because, wow, somebody has taken, Iron Maiden and the Dead and Fish and really combined them, like Humphreys, but more with a metal style and more with the prog style. And it was just like it was just a dream come true. And yeah, with Humphreys in 2002, they were on stage in their early 20s, looking like they were just out of high school, playing YYZ note for note. I mean, or YYZ actually, you should say,
Mhm.
note for note. And that huge Yes influence was there, for sure. And of course, you guys, you have played excerpts of Tales from Topographic Oceans with John Anderson, and delved deep into that as well. The question I have as a Dream Theater fan is, what's it going to be once you guys are up and running again? Is
Right.
that going to return, or is it more like, you've been away for 13 years or so, and you kind of have to just kind of see how it is for a little bit. You're not really in
Right.
charge of these things anymore, I guess, yet. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much nailed it right there. Back in the day, that was all my department, and the guys were always so cool to give me free reign to, whatever my imagination could think up for these set lists. They went with it. If I said, "Hey, I want to cover a Queen song tonight," we would do it. There was never any argument or resistance. So for all those years, the set lists and doing these crazy, unique ideas and shows was always like my baby, and something that I just really loved for the band. And I think I think the fans really liked it and appreciated it too. After I left Dream Theater, for the last 13 years or so, from my understanding, I haven't followed it too closely, but from my understanding, they've been more doing static set lists and things like that. So in answer to your question, is it going to be like the way it used to be? like you just said at the end of your question, I think I need to just get in and get comfortable first and see where we are at this point, in 2024. We're older. It's been a lot of time apart. So I think there'll probably be a process of just getting comfortable and everybody finding their place in the new chemistry. Um, and that being said, I would have no problem with the static set list for a little while because it's been so long for me. I've been gone for so long, and there's going to be a whole new generation of fans coming to these shows that never saw the band with me in it. So even if we went out for this first world tour with a static set list of doing all the classics, it's been so long for me that each and every night it's going to be special and exciting within itself. And, for me, changing the set list for all those years with Dream Theater, a lot of it was a reaction to me kind of, I don't want to say getting bored, but you get a little complacent playing the same songs over and over and over and over. So I would switch it up a lot, not only for the fans, but for ourselves to keep it fresh. So, but now coming back after 13 years, it's going to be fresh every night for me. So that in itself will be exciting. But all that being said, I think the band really does want to interject those kind of things back into the live show. I think they have expressed to me that they kind of have been missing it and that they kind of want me to take the reins with the set list and with the ideas of crazy sets and crazy shows and unique things. It seems to me, I mean, John Petrucci and I talked about it briefly. I think he really wants me to take those reins again. So fingers crossed that it will evolve naturally and organically to get to that point soon enough. Because it
Yeah.
really is such a unique thing, and I know a lot of the Dream Theater fans have missed it in the last decade or so. So it would be nice to interject it back in.
Yeah, because it's not just like Ripper or Blaze coming in for an album or two. I mean, you're essentially the new guy in a lot of
Right.
ways. I mean, they've done a lot of material. Since
Well, rather than Blaze, you bring up Ripper and Blaze. I mean, I think this is more like Bruce or Halford coming back, coming because
yeah, yeah,
I'm coming back.
right.
I'm a, but
Meaning, well, you weren't gone you were gone for a lot longer than just a couple of albums, I guess.
right. Yeah, I get your point.
So, I have a feeling though that what you're saying too, I feel like the band wants to be led in that way that you used to lead
I,
in
I
those
think
directions.
I think
Eventually.
there's a lot of areas where they're probably very happy with the way they function now. So those will be the areas that I have to be a team player on and take a step back and realize that I'm not running the show like I used to. So I have to respect that. But I think there are other areas where I think they definitely have expressed missing my input in a lot of other areas. And those will be the areas that, if they want me to take the reins, then I will happily do so. But I need to be respectful of the time that I've been away. And I don't want to step on their toes, but it's exciting. It's no matter which way you slice it, it's exciting, and I can't wait to get back on stage. But I mean, I remember talking with a bunch of the guys when I did the Humphreys gig because I looked over and I think it was Bayless had or maybe it was Ryan. One of them had a list of like hundreds of songs, and they like on top of their amps. I'm like, holy fuck! I was like, do you have all these at your fingertips? And they were like, yeah. And they completely write a completely different set list for every show. I remember talking to Joel about it as well. Um, just the whole idea about writing set lists and changing set lists. Because for me with Dream Theater, I would spend hours upon hours, on each set list, making each one unique and looking at whatever we played in a particular city, the previous tours, the previous 2 or 3 tours, and writing a set list that didn't repeat anything. And if you were doing 2 nights in a row, not repeating anything. And it was a very meticulous chore. I would literally spend my nights off doing that, preparing for the coming shows in the next day or
Yeah.
two.
Yeah,
And
Trey
it
used to
seems
do
that
that too.
Humphreys has a very, very similar, um, process, which is something that I so can respect and admire because I know how much time and effort it takes to do that and put those kind of shows together and those kind of set lists.
And their touring schedule is insane. It is insane. It's remarkable they're normal because they are just consistently on the road. And the fans are also they take turns like with each band member writing a set list.
Oh, really?
And the
I didn't know
fans have
that.
now been able to tell who wrote the set list. You
Wow,
know,
that's pretty cool.
the heavier nights, oh wait a minute, that's Ryan. They throw in they cover a Tool song, then they know maybe Ryan had a hand in that. So, um, yeah,
That's
there's,
interesting.
yeah. And I wanted to let the fans know 20 years ago, Anchor Drops came out. Our little band, it was their third studio album, but really considered the first made. It's the first time a lot of people really heard Humphreys. We were stunned to see uh, Anchor Drops on your top 10 albums of 2004. So that was the beginning of like, oh my gosh, and then later on we found out that Steve Hackett's a big fan, Jeff Lynne, Andy Powell, all these people listening to Humphreys. But tell me again about how you got into Humphreys. You said it was through Fish that you just kind of started kind of like researching around in
Right.
that scene and discovered them, or was it somebody that turned you on to them? I know that you had never seen them before the 29th, right?
Right. Um, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I think Fish was my gateway to Humphreys. And like I mentioned earlier, I was really interested in the way that Fish wrote their set list and doing the covers and things like that. And then somebody, I wish I could remember who it was, but somebody mentioned Humphreys to me and turned me onto them and gave me some of their live recordings of some of their covers. And they were covering like, Abbey Road, but then also covering like Master of Puppets. And I was like, oh my God, I mean, this is my exact musical taste. They're doing King Crimson and Rush, and they're also doing, these metal things. And so uh I think Anchor Drops might have been the first studio album I listened to, and I think that was released on Inside Out, if I'm correct, who I already had a relationship with. I think it was Sony or Inside Out started putting out a few of their albums in the early 2000s, and a bunch of my side projects were on Inside Out, like Transatlantic was on Inside Out, and the albums I was doing with Neil Morse was on Inside Out. So I think I got sent in advance of the album, and then the albums that followed as well. And I just, immediately became a fan. I felt connected to them because they were doing, like I said, they were doing these unique set lists and covers and things like that, and they were combining jam band stuff and classic rock and metal and prog. It was an intersection of all the things I love in music. So I immediately connected with what they were doing. And then somehow Chris Myers reached out to me, or somebody introduced us, and then Chris and I started emailing each other and got to know each other. And we met a few times. He came out to a few Dream Theater shows. And, I've been on board ever since.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And the influences that you guys share are really the Genesis connection is huge. All six of them went to go see the 2007 reunion tour together at a show. They've been very open about their Iron Maiden influence with the twin lead guitars, and of course the Yes. They're one of the biggest disappointments. It didn't happen. John Anderson was going to tour with Humphreys, and they were going to do a
Oh
set of
God.
Humphreys followed by a set of Yes with John fronting the band, and
Well,
he
I,
just
d-
couldn't travel at
I
the
had the
time.
honor of doing that. I did that with Transatlantic. We did an entire set with Yes set with John singing. Man,
Right.
doing it with Humphreys would have been killer.
Yeah, and this and so you mentioned Transatlantic. If you were to recommend to Humphreys McGee fans other than Dream Theater, who a lot of them have been exposed to for the first time recently, but definitely some DT fans beforehand, the other things that you do, working with Flying Colors and like you said, Transatlantic and all the other projects. What do you think that DT that Humphreys fans would be turned on to some of the other stuff that you do?
I think almost anything I do, I think Humphreys fans would probably get, because, like you said, there's a lot of similarities in my taste, and it seems like the guys in Humphreys' taste, and as well as their fan base taste. I think it sounds like we have a lot of similarities, but I think Transatlantic would be a good place for an Humphreys fan to start, because it's a little bit more jammy
Yeah,
in terms of that old school Genesis, Yes, Pink Floyd, Beatles sound. It's not as metal. Like, Dream Theater is very metal, very
yeah,
technical, whereas Transatlantic is a little more classic rock and prog rock based. Also Liquid Tension experiment, because what
true,
what I
right.
do with LTE, half of what LTE does is improv and jam based. All of the three albums we've made are pretty much half composition and half improv. And all the live shows that LTE ever did were based a lot on a lot of improv as well. So I think the fans that dig that side of Humphreys would probably dig that side of Liquid Tension Experiment. But I would say, look at anything I do. Anything I do with Neil Morse, the Neil Morse band, and Neil and I have done all these covers albums actually. So if you're an Humphreys fan that digs all the covers, maybe check out. Neil and I have done 3 cover to cover albums, and we cover everything from Badfinger to Yes to King Crimson to Elvis Costello to the Police to Genesis. So if you're the type that digs all the covers that Humphreys do, maybe check out those 3 cover to cover albums.
Yeah, great. Those are great recommendations, especially the LTE stuff. When you talk about jam bands, it's not a word I like, but that is the term. A lot of
Right.
people really kind of go back to the Grateful Dead and then kind of offshoot from there. For me, it's impossible to mention true improvisational rock without talking about Deep Purple.
Mm.
And talking about even Led Zeppelin back in the day,
Yeah,
doing half-hour
absolutely.
versions of No Quarter on the 1977 tour,
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Cream and Blue Cheer, and even Sabbath was doing 17-minute versions of Wicked World back
Yep.
in the early 70s. But when you think about when I think about early Deep Purple, especially, and the guys are big Deep Purple fans too, a band that most Americans, unfortunately, only know Smoke on the Water and don't know them from Foghat, in some ways. What are some of your favorite like early 70s improvisational rock moments from Purple or from other bands, Blue Cheer or whoever? I know
Right.
that's the 60s, but going way back that may not be in the hippie, wing of improvisational rock that people
Right.
check out.
Well, for starters, you brought up a great example with Deep Purple, and you mentioned it earlier, but Dream Theater did we one of the albums we did cover there in its entirety was Deep Purple's Made in Japan. And when we covered that, we learned it, I don't want to say note for note, but we really learned it like we
Even
learned
the
the
banter.
improvs, we learned the jams. See, there's like a 20-minute version of Space Truckin' on there that we learned. So it was really it was actually a great exercise in kind of studying the way bands jam, learning that album and learning all of these live versions and trying to recreate them. It gave us a real good insight on what, how these jam bands think. And not that Purple was a jam band, but I just mean that concept. And like you mentioned, Zeppelin, those early Zeppelin live recordings are just so great because every night is completely different. And to me, Dazed and Confused and Whole Lot of Love, those were 2 of the big centerpieces for them to jam on.
Yeah,
This live versions of Dazed and Confused that go on for 40 minutes.
yeah,
Another one that comes to mind is The Who. I love like live at
yeah.
Leeds, like the live version of My Generation would just go off on these tangents and do all these other things. So yeah, those are the prototypes, and I miss bands like that. That's why I love a band like Humphreys doing it, and that's why I connected to a band like Fish, when I discovered them back in the 90s. Those are the bands that are still doing this. And I learned a lot from Humphreys that night, just a lot about jamming. Just the one show I played with them, the one set I played with them really inspired me. And I learned a lot about listening and improvising and there's a few things that I picked up from them that I definitely want to integrate in, any bands I utilize jamming with in the future.
That's fantastic. I was speaking to the guys just about the whole thing, and you're a guy that likes to do side projects to keep yourself interested, and I think doing side projects helps a band. You go out there and you pull all these other things, and then you come back to your
Right.
band with this new fresh sense. Um, I know Ryan especially was like, I'd love to do something with Mike. I would assume you'd be open perhaps to doing some sort of side project with the guys or some sort of work in the future with them, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I really, really love the guys, not only as musicians and players, they're all each so phenomenal, but I loved them all individually as people. Their personalities they were so easy to work with and get along with and hang with. So yeah, I would welcome working with those guys again anytime soon. I mean, the fact of the matter is I've spent the last 13 years doing all these projects and side projects and things. Now that I'm back in Dream Theater, that is going to be my focus for a
Sure.
while. So I'm not looking to start anything new right
Right.
now. I'm kind of looking to go back home for a while and just focus on that. But of course, I would welcome working with any of these guys in any capacity. You know, whenever I'm able to, if and when I actually could, would love to. So yeah,
What are
it
you
was
most
such a blast.
excited about? Last question. What are you most excited about playing when you're back on the road with Dream Theater? I mean, I assume that I just read a recent interview with John said the writing hasn't really started yet, or the recording hasn't really started yet on something new. Would
Neither. Yeah.
I don't know if you guys are going to do a tour with the old stuff first to warm up, but what are you looking forward to playing the most that you haven't played with the guys in a while?
I'm looking forward to playing anything with them
Yeah,
because I haven't played with them in 13 years.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, we start work on a new album in about 2 weeks, and we're going in with a clean slate. That's the way at least in my day in the band, that's the way we always made records towards the end. So many of our albums were written in the studio with a clean blank canvas to work with, and we just bounce ideas off of each other and build from scratch. So yeah, that's how we're going to do this next record. And as excited as I am to make a new record and write new music with the guys, personally, the thing I'm most excited about is getting on the road and playing shows. That's to me the more fulfilling outlet. I love being able to play to an audience and feel their energy and their excitement. And I know the energy and excitement from the fans at these shows are just going to be electric. I can't even imagine what the vibes are going to be like. I felt a little bit of it when John Petrucci and I did his solo tour about a
right.
year and a half ago. You could really feel the energy and excitement in the room. And we were seeing grown men crying every night, just at
Yeah.
me and John just being up there together. But now to have the five of us up there together and be playing these classic songs that are such a part of our history. And like I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a whole new generation of people, younger people that never saw this lineup together. So to me, that's what I'm most excited about is getting on stage and playing for the fans.
Yeah, I love Kevin Moore. I love Derek, but this is the classic lineup. I mean, so for all of you that, are thinking about checking out DT for the first time, this is the classic lineup to see. And everybody's very, very excited about it. And Mike, we want to thank you for doing this for us, man. This is really cool. It's been a great meeting of the minds and worlds colliding. And the vibe after your sit-in wasn't just, hey, that was great, Mike Portnoy just sat in. It was like Mike's part of the family.
Wow, that's
So
great.
we really
And I
hope to
felt
see
it the
more of you.
same. I really felt the same. My daughter Melody came along for the show and she just felt it. And we both just left like, wow, what a cool experience, man. What a cool band. What a great bunch of guys. What a great bunch of fans. It really, really did feel like family. And I was so appreciative to have been welcomed so warmly.
That's great. Well, we all are just absolutely thrilled that you're part of the family and look forward to seeing you in some capacity with Humphreys again. So thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you. My pleasure, man.